This is the way it feels to move through summer in Lululemon. Iconic Align softness without the front seam. For our smoothest look and feel ever, summer won't know what hit it. Stretch your limits in the non-stop flexibility of the new Lululemon Align No Line Pant in select stores and at lululemon.com.
Hello and welcome to All Indians Matter. I am Ashraf Engineer. Data has often been referred to as the new oil, and we all know that it is transforming industries across the board, from manufacturing to healthcare and aviation to defense. However, it's not just in businesses. Data science is being used to find solutions to pressing social problems too. Nonprofits, civic agencies, and the public sector recognize its potential to address social challenges and drive positive change. For example, machine learning tools helped Greece identify incoming COVID 19 infected travelers at nearly twice the rate that conventional random tests would have achieved, thereby reducing the spread of the virus. Data science combines statistical analysis, computer science, and domain expertise to understand and solve some of our most complex problems. These span climate change to poverty and education to hunger. Can India use data science to deliver social impact at scale?
All Indians matter.
We have on the show Srikrishna Sridhar Murthy, or Krishna, co-founder and CEO of Sattva Consulting, a leading impact consulting firm. Krishna champions denominator thinking in India's social impact landscape. It focuses on driving systemic change at scale by fostering collaboration and innovation at the intersection of businesses, civil society, governments, and the broader impact ecosystem. Krishna has been advisor to national and international corporations, non-profits, foundations, and government agencies. He has designed and implemented initiatives across areas like CSR, sustainability, impact investing, and responsible supply chains. Krishna has also supported the creation of knowledge and data public good platforms like India Data Insights and the India Partner Network. Welcome, Krishna.
Hello, Ashraf. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you for the conversation today.
Krishna, tell us a little about how data works to create social impact.
So, data is very interesting and quite new in the way the social impact, ecosystem has started to think, in India. So, if you go back in history a little bit, obviously, non-profit movement has been going on in India for decades, but in the last 20, 30 years is really when it's taken a lot of momentum, primarily because India, has started creating its own wealth, since the early 90s. And the evolution of the local and the domestic philanthropy ecosystem has really accelerated the nonprofit space. And especially the last 10 years, the CSR law in India has made a really big difference. Right? And this is for the first time, not only companies are doing, more structured CSR, but also reporting it, which means suddenly you have more data about what's happening from a CSR or corporate philanthropy perspective. The data systems also have improved in terms of company reporting and promoter wealth and the wealth management ecosystem. So you know how much more wealth and philanthropy is getting structured. So people like Hurun and many others have started publishing more data. And also more and more, nonprofits and organizations have started to think about research and data as, interesting tools for making decisions. Maybe a couple of examples, Ashraf, if I can share. Today, thanks to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs and the CSR law insisting on reporting data, we now know that CSR in India, in the first 9 years of the law, spent close to 1.3 lakh crores, right? And a lot of that has gone to sectors like education and health. We also know that a lot of that money has been spent in West and South, right? Without without this law, we wouldn't be able to get this kind of an insight, which means today automatically for a layman you start saying, but aren't they the more developed parts of India, right? Shouldn't CSR be spent more in the eastern and the central and the northern part of India, or the northeastern part of India, or at least be more distributed, right? So this question now can be asked because you have data coming in front of you, right? Similarly, it's very interesting to note that the number of billionaires India has, and we're almost the second largest, I think, in Asia number of billionaires, which means how come, and how the family office ecosystem or the family philanthropy ecosystem is growing. And I am now told that there are over 6,000 ultra HNIs in India who have certain amount of wealth and are looking to do philanthropic activity, and less than 0.5% of that money of the wealth of the ultra HNI today is spent in, let's say, philanthropy. So a lot of this now starts to tell you that to create societal impact, who you target, where you go, and how you also understand issues. And as we go along, I'm also happy to talk a little more about the fact that government is putting up more data now, which is helping decide where to deploy this money, as well. So I think broadly in the last 10 years, thanks to the evolution of the domestic philanthropy ecosystem and some very interesting policies and laws in India, data in the impact sector has significantly grown and better decision making has started to come. We still have a long way to go, but it started to happen.
But Krishna, I think one of the biggest problems in India has been, especially in delivering social impact, has been the lack of data, especially at the government level. And we've had so much debate about it. So how do you deploy data science in such a situation to solve complex social challenges?
So I think so we started looking at this problem, Ashraf, a few years ago, almost about 7-8 years ago, where we started asking the question of how much CSR is coming, where is it going, how big is the NGO ecosystem in India, what are all the key issues that a CSR should consider funding, and things like that, right? And then we actually started looking for data, in the government ecosystem. What we found was not that data was not there at all. It was that data was there, but very fragmented, right? It was there in bits and pieces in different places. It was not standard. It was very inconsistent in data structures. For example, you would have census data of a certain year, but let's say a PDS data of some other year, and green cover data or literacy data of some other year. So it's all significantly fragmented. It had obviously quality issues. One of the biggest issues we also figured out in this whole process was the fact that company identification numbers were very, very messed up in India. You get different industries, and I think we wrote an article recently about it. One of my colleagues who pointed out how certain IT companies were called out as healthcare companies because of the company identification number, which means your classification was all wrong. So quality issues were there. And the challenge of extractability of this data through APIs and everything else. So this, so it's not like there isn't data. If you look for it, you will find certain aspects. But these are some of the challenges that we face. So we actually, put a lot of, interesting effort in building, our platform called India Data Insights, which today is used by different parts of the ecosystem to address some of these challenges today. So it is really, of course, we have to improve the quality of data, and only someone like, the government can do something of this scale. It's very impossible for a private sector to kind of do something. And I think in October 2024, the national metadata structure was kind of put up by MOSPI, where better standards and guidance was kind of put in. So I think we're getting better, but the challenge is that today data does exist for decision making, but needs to be kind of brought together, cleaned up, and better insights have to be drawn out, as well. And hopefully, as an ecosystem, we can all work with the government to improve the quality of data.
Absolutely. And before we proceed, Krishna, I just wanted to let viewers, or rather the listeners, know that when you say MOSPI, you're referring to the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Krishna, I thought we could look at some sectors, critical sectors, one by one, and see how they are using data or could use data. Let's start with healthcare. What are the specific challenges that could do with the application of data science? Now, for example, I mentioned in my intro, about disease detection and preventing its spread. And is that what the sector has taken up first?
Yes, it's very interesting, and a real example, which I would say in COVID, Ashraf, unfortunately, it was quite a difficult time those years. One of the things that we and a bunch of organizations like ACT Grants and others did very early on during COVID was figure out, based on existing public data, what districts were actually more vulnerable in terms of, let's say, infrastructure, from a hospital and ICU beds and other things perspective, right? And immediately we created a heat map, from a district perspective, saying these are the most vulnerable districts from an infrastructure perspective. So if COVID spreads to these districts, then there's going to be a bit of a chaos, right? So you were able to then deploy philanthropic capital, NGO support, and a lot of that as a guidance to many, many donors, saying if you have money to deploy, then prioritize these states, these districts in these parts of the country, because some of the others, obviously everybody needed help at that time, but you could use that as a bit of a data map to create more targeted interventions. Similarly, I think in health, as you're probably aware, there's a lot of prevalence now, unfortunately, of the mental health issues or even the non-communicable diseases, which are all new issues that the country is grappling with. And without, for example, bringing in a much stronger data science, to this, it is very hard to figure out what are the issues. Is this a problem that one would face in, let's say, in schools, for example, when it comes to mental health, or when it comes to non-communicable diseases, what parts of the country are more vulnerable? So if you use the right data indicators, and work with experts, you can now also start to predict where you need to act first, and also what type of engagement might be required. Recently, I was talking to the Shankara Cancer Research Foundation, and they're doing some very, very fascinating early on study on detecting certain trends, in communities from an oral cancer perspective. Again, using some really good data science, methodologies and stuff. And of course, ID Madras runs an absolutely fascinating brain center, which is today put India's neuroscience at the ahead of many, many other parts of the world, primarily looking at computing power and data science at the center of it. So all of these are, I think, fantastic examples of how data and data science can contribute. And I think, call to action for anybody interested in data, that, these are fascinating sectors to not only create societal impact, but also solve some really difficult problems the world is facing.
Speaking of difficult problems, India has a serious problem on the education front. We've had problems with enrollment. We've had problems with keeping kids in school, especially girls. We've had problems with learning outcomes. Do you think there is an application for data science there?
Oh, brilliant! Absolutely. One of my favorite, stories and examples is, how this wonderful NGO called Educate Girls, started, and how they run. They literally started. They actually analyzed which district in India has the worst, enrollment of girls and the dropout of girls, and they literally started there, right, in parts of Rajasthan and stuff, right. So in education, again, for us to kind of understand, and I think today one of the most well-known uses of data in education is the ASAR report that comes out from Pratham, which really informs a lot of us in the sector on how education sector is evolving and where interventions are required. So all of these today, I think, start to build their strategy using data, from that perspective. Even when we have today, looked at, we built a model school program in Karnataka, which is like a consortium of NGOs and funders coming together. Again, there it's about implementing the national education policy in about 200 model schools. But each of those schools were selected using data, on attendance, on where the problem was, and getting the right mix of schools to be able to demonstrate the model in a way that it creates a blueprint for scale for those districts in the state. Again, can be done looking at actual challenges on the ground today. And I think the sector is also, Ashraf, for me, what is heartening is the fact that people are using both secondary and primary data. Today, a lot of the CSRs working in education or even NGOs are insisting on doing a detailed need assessment, of the problem before jumping into solutions. Many years ago, you would almost, I remember early days of CSR, people would automatically assume that you have to donate books or give away uniforms and stuff. No, that's not the approach now. People are looking at getting a lot more deeper understanding of the problem using primary methods, and then mapping that to secondary data, and then taking decisions on how to design programs and move forward. Right? For me, that's really, really encouraging. At an ecosystem.
What about poverty alleviation, Krishna? Because I know there's been a lot of talk and a lot has been written about using data to allocate resources, for example, to the PDS. But that's what I'm talking about is actually lifting people out of poverty into the middle class or the low middle classes. Is there application there?
Absolutely, Ashraf. I think for me, the whole definition of poverty, as you know, has changed, and Niti Aayog also now looks at the multiple dimensional poverty, which brings in multi aspects of the poverty, and depending on how you look at it, they're also now able to kind of put out real metrics, and the whole aspirational district program, that the Niti Aayog launched using some of these indicators. Today is giving, which is now also moved to an aspirational block program, is actually giving a very strong guidance to where investments need to, kind of happen. Two very interesting, examples I will share with you. Today, obviously hunger is one of the elements of poverty, that needs to be addressed, and the SDG 2, which is the hunger index. One, India has been doing very badly in the World Hunger Index. And what we managed to do many years ago was to apply the World Hunger Index framework at a district level in India, which gave you immediately, the list of districts you should go and address, to actually solve it at an India level. So it was not an India problem. It was in those few districts problem. So that pinpoints you some interesting stuff. But also this shows, when you start using data, you also see the gap in investment that exists between, where the need is and where the money is going. So Bihar, for example, is the almost, one of the most lagging states when it comes to the, the hunger criteria and the indicators. And in the 9 years of CSR, only out of the 1.83 lakh crores that I talked about, only 41 crores has been allocated to hunger problem in Bihar, right? Which means one of the most important issues in the country, in the largest state possible, today doesn't get the most attention, in terms of investment and solutioning type of stuff, right? So data, when you start looking at it, it also starts showing you where the investment needs are and how decision making should happen, for us. And I think the multi-dimensional problem, the poverty index also has started to throw out this very important aspect that India is now moved into a underserved market and not an underprivileged market, which means there is income increasing. People are looking for services. People are looking for solutions. People are not just looking for charity, right? And I think that's started to shift the whole conversation and around livelihood and so many other, kind of aspects. So even understanding that poverty is about extreme poverty, multidimensional poverty, and then there's the energy poverty, where access to energy. I have resources, but I don't have access to energy. I have money, but I don't have clean drinking water. So then you start to think about these, solutions from a, how do I serve that ecosystem in a more sustainable way rather than just a charitable way? Then you start to bring in better innovation, more entrepreneurship, and potentially a viable, more sustainable model into the play. But data is key to make these decisions, and I think that's very critical for us as a country.
I'm so glad you mentioned services, because I think India has had a problem in the sense that it's not always a lack of funds that is being allocated, but it's a last mile delivery problem often.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about that?
So it's interesting, right? While data can take us to the right place, it can point us. It can't change data cannot solve the problem. It's a huge behavior change issue in India, right? Nutrition. I just talked about hunger and nutrition, and in one of the states, we were working around the factories of a very well-known food brand and food and beverages company, and around the factory, we were trying to address malnourishment. And what we found out was, the data told us this is where we should go, this village, we should go work in, all of that stuff. But when we actually went and, we saw that the food was reaching the household, right? The government program was ensuring that the food reached the household through the Anganwadis. The corporate was ensuring the food was reaching the household where the pregnant women were and the newborn was. But the food was being consumed by the father. right? Now that's a behavior change data cannot solve, right? I mean, it is now, that's the last mile problem. You can make sure that the right household gets the support, but inside the household, it's the behavior change that one needs to kind of address. And I think we learned it the hard way in the whole Swachh Bharat campaign, where the whole story about Soch ki baat hai and not Swachh ki baat hai, right? It was really about changing the mindset around the toilet and open defecation, and not about who would get that 10,000 rupees, because the households that were getting 10,000 rupees support, had television sets and bikes and everything, the nice sofa. Just that they didn't have the toilet. So it was not about putting more money into that household. It was about changing mindset. So I think we need to also ensure there's a lot of, along with product engineering, there needs to be social engineering and behavior change, aspects, which is also a lot of, again, use of data, right? Because you start thinking about, and also data at the community level, Ashraf. For me, that's very exciting. The data is not for just us, you in Bombay or me in Bangalore type of stuff, right? This is data in the hands of people who are local communities and the local ecosystem, then using that to make better decisions. And I've seen many villages where, for behavior change, they've actually almost marked out which house is doing what kind of work, whether they have the toilet, whether behavior change has happened or not, how the usage is happening. And they've really, local communities and local students have brought in lots of changes by, if you empower them in a way to think through data, and not the whole, yes, we talk about big data and all of that stuff, but also local data and local use of data in communities makes a big difference. The most fascinating thing about dengue is you can do all the research and science and medical that you want, but eventually in my apartment, I need to ensure water doesn't stagnate. That's the final solution. 80% of solution is in my apartment, water should not stagnate, right? Now that's as local a solution, as needed to be done. So I need to be empowered with that information and knowledge to be able to kind of do that. So I think behavior change is something we cannot ignore in India.
Also, I mean, if you look at one of the greatest modern challenges, it's climate. Now that has various impacts, but especially in India's case, the impact on agriculture is extremely important. Is there anything being done on that front as far as data science is concerned?
Uh, that's a great point, Ashraf, because we are now beginning to see newer problems because of climate, right? And things that, like education and health and poverty have been things that, we've been dealing with, for a few decades now, but climate is suddenly here and knocking on our, kind of doors. I think there are multiple interesting, both opportunities, to solve the problem and apply data science. So one example is the fact that today, the biggest challenge India will have, and already has, sitting in a city like Bangalore, is water. And summer is coming, and 90% of our water is for agriculture consumption, 87 to 90%. And today, with so much of challenge in terms of the ground level water, the way water is stored, and used, we do not have a water map. We do not have a data map of the of where these challenges are. And some of the and even when you go into underground water and drinking water today, if you just look at how Punjab may arsenic in drinking water in the groundwater level has increased, it's mind blowing and staggering and scary. There are parts of India where we are beginning to get uranium in drinking water, right? So if you look at a water map of India, and the challenges today, there's not, unfortunately, enough data that's kind of coming out there, and agriculture is going to kind of struggle. So we, along with some of the large agri companies, are now thinking about and designing a digital public infrastructure that can actually bring together the whole water and agriculture ecosystem and solve for the data, and create also much better partnership between various sources of water in the local communities to create a solution for better usage of water in agriculture, and also fund innovations that need to be there. That there are water difficult areas or drought prone areas where you need a different type of solution for the soil health and lots of other things. So data becomes very critical there. The second is, with climate comes disaster. We are now seeing more disasters kind of coming through, and unfortunately disaster management response in India and many other parts are also still reasonably reactive, right? While we have become a little more preventive, I think we've done some of these things reasonably well with better warning systems. But aid reaches, in not the more structured way, right? Everybody puts up aid in a lot more emotional way when, let's say, a flood happens or a earthquake happens or a landslide happens. Everybody's sending all kinds of stuff into these places. But we know that there are certain households that need it more, there's certain pockets that need it more, and we are not able to direct that today. So today, very interestingly, an NGO called Seeds is building a digital public good, which through data and technology is able to actually identify a household in need in a disaster and direct aid, a lot more structured way, into that ecosystem. Right? So I think climate will bring new challenges, and I think hopefully with more technology and data and the sector becoming better at it, we are able to come up with newer solutions that can address these, challenges as well.
Does the Indian social sector recognize this power of data and how it can be harnessed? Is it investing in that, or do you think it's still slow on the uptick?
I think I am hopeful. That's another way of saying we're still not there yet, but I'm hopeful. That we will change, and the ecosystem is changing. So one of the things that we are always encouraging, for example, the nonprofit ecosystem, is to say, hey, think about how you can fundraise using data, right? India's CSR law, like I just said, where 29,000 plus companies come under the law. If you randomly send a proposal to anybody and everybody, you're only going to get disappointed, right? But if you had data to figure out who's working in my geography, who's working in my state, my district, on issues that matter to me, then you will be able to kind of target your donor much better. So data can help you raise money better, right? Similarly, if you knew where the problems were better, and if you were able to kind of tell your own impact narrative and the story in a structured way, you would be able to be more successful in designing your programs. For example, it was very interesting. One of the NGOs was looking to do increase green cover in a state. We said, just look at the green cover map of the state, right? And you actually look at, which are the districts to be targeted, what parts of the Western Ghats need more support, and use some soil data to create a much stronger map. So your proposal, your solution, everything becomes much better. The other thing is data is very critical, Ashraf, in this sector from a monitoring perspective. You need to course correct on a regular basis, right? So what is called the monitoring, and evaluation function in the nonprofit sector or the social impact space is also very, very data driven. And using the data, your own operations can get better. But I feel today, because of thanks, like I said, to the CSR law and the domestic philanthropy becoming slightly more mature, people are beginning to recognize the importance of data, because the local donors are asking for more solutions which are data oriented, or they're asking questions where you need to justify using data. So the sector has started to open up to more data and technology at this point, but I would say we have a long way to go, and hopefully I will have a much more confident and better answer for you in a couple of years from now.
Yeah, I think also, Krishna, one of the big problems is that these technologies don't come cheap. And obviously, this is not a sector that is cash rich. It's never been in India.
Yeah.
So how do you get around that?
So, so data seems like this. Like you said, data is the new oil. Oil is for the rich.
So trading isn't cheap.
You need to be a sheikh to be owning your oil. Right? So I think that is a bit of a challenge at this point, right? But I think we are sitting in the land of the digital public goods and digital public infrastructure, right? What India has done with UPI, what India has done with Aadhaar, I think a lot of that gives us hope that you could, if approached in a digital public good or a digital public infrastructure kind of a model, and not leave it to each organization to fix its own problem. I think at an ecosystem level, I think we can address it. Of course, there's going to be a lot of challenge around data protection, security, accessibility. And India, we also need to remember India is a country of multiple languages. Not everybody speaks English. So you need data in Oriya and Kannada and Marathi and Bengali and all of those stuff, right? So you need to be able to kind of understand and think about data in local context, local language, in terms of analysis. So I feel technology is the answer, and if we can't build cheap technology, then who else can, right? So we need to kind of do this at an ecosystem level. And I think this is also hopefully where, for me, the biggest opportunity here is the fact that the second largest sector bringing CSR money in India is the technology IT sector. That's one of the largest sector in the country. They bring today the second or the third largest amount of CSR money after, BFSI and the banking, financial services, and the energy, oil and gas ecosystem. So they can today potentially contribute significantly to reducing the cost of technology on which data can be, put together and built out. And I think, I know it's now the the a little bit of the season to talk about AI, and bring up more AI into the conversation. But I think all of these becomes super critical for us. There is also a bit of a challenge of talent here as well, right? It's not just about creating that infrastructure, creating the data, but how do you use the data? Who builds capacity of organizations to use data? Because India has 2.678 lakh nonprofits out there, a lot of universities that are now using philanthropy and creating impact, lots of social enterprises. So all of these are sitting in different corners of India. Some of them are very, very small. So how do you kind of also build their capacity, and where do we bring the talent? So I think there will be challenges, but I think hopefully because of the digital public good and DPI, digital public infrastructure approach, and with the IT industry of India bringing their philanthropic mindset to this, we hopefully can bring down the costs over a period of time.
Yeah, also, it's not just cost, Krishna. There's also a talent issue, right? These are specialized skills, and normally you don't find people with these skills in the social sector.
Not at all. And I think this is a sector which obviously started off with a lot of the masters of social work or rural management type of talent, where the person tries to understand what behavior changes or understand education or health and things like that. But I think bringing in a little more complementary skills is very, very important. And I think I see it in three buckets, Ashraf. Right? There's one, we need to kind of upskill professionals in this space. We just don't have a choice. That needs to be done for sure. And hopefully we can integrate this into the schools producing these professionals as well, so that it gets embedded there. The second is, I think Indians are now retiring early, so they're getting out of jobs at 40, 45, 50, saying I want to do something meaningful. And meaningful typically is social sector, and typically they're ending up either in a spiritual place or in a social impact space, right? And in either place there is some impact that is being created, and these professionals are bringing corporate sector skills into the sector, right? I think that's another interesting opportunity, as corporate guys come here. The third is, I think we need to create, today multiple, organizations. I know JPAL and data.org have a, fellowship for data in the sector. There are people like ISDM, Cisco, all of these guys are trying to bring more tech and data into the sector. So I think more fellowships, more young talent, even if they are short-term talent for 1 year, 2 year, doing some work in the impact sector, as internship, as volunteering, and then going back can also complement. So if you're able to build capacity of the existing folks, if you're able to kind of make sure that more corporate folks join the sector, because that's already happening, and we're able to bring in young talent, which are, more specialized in the data skills, to come into the sector even for a shorter period of time, because it benefits them in their future careers and things like that. All of these are, I think, opportunities to complement, the skills, but we need to still solve the core problem of the talent becoming more updated and upgraded from a data thinking perspective.
Are there any areas which are unaddressed as yet and that you think could do with the application of data science?
I think so many of them. No, I mean, it's just India is unfortunately the land of many opportunities in the impact sector. But I think maybe a few. I think one of the most important is the absolute imbalance in geographical distribution of today the impact ecosystem. Right, the philanthropy is in west and south, and in specific districts. Pune today, for example, gets more CSR than the entire of Northeast put together, right? So one district, and similarly, like I said, I was giving the example of SDG 2 in Bihar. So there's a lot of imbalance in terms of how philanthropy is getting distributed. And I think data should drive and address the issue of more balanced philanthropy, regionally and issue wise as well. Um, uh, Drinking water, for example, today gets less than 1.5% of CSR, which is, I think, one of the most important issues India is facing today. Uh, Within climate as well, you will see a lot of the focus going into certain more infrastructure related solutions than, let's say, technological solutions, again, where data can play a big role in defining where investment kind of happens. I think it's also the one thing that interests me a lot from a data perspective is uh, to better understand the non-profit ecosystem in India. Nobody knows how many NGOs exist, what they do, where are they, and it's very hard to find NGOs. So interestingly, Ashraf, and I know it's very hard to believe India now has a spend problem and not a money problem. We have more philanthropy money than we can absorb in the ecosystem, right? Because the CSR law, like I said, the money that's got created in wealth, that's increased the philanthropy budgets of the country, and yet we do not yet have the absorption capacity, at this point, because it's hard to discover good NGOs and good projects and bring trust between the two ecosystems for the money to meet the need. So the trust can only be built with data, right? And I think it's very, very important to create that transparency in the ecosystem, and that's the biggest opportunity for me in the what data can help solve for all of us.
And what do you think that sector can do now over the long term to address these challenges?
I think, firstly, we need to bring Sarkar into the game. There's no question about that this can be done by private ecosystem. I think the whole government ecosystem partnering with the impact ecosystem on better data for development, I think is super critical, and I think it's beginning to happen already. The Ministry of Statistics, like we just talked about, and Niti Ayog, they're all kind of using a lot more data and bringing in that kind of a partnership, and this should happen now with agriculture. There's obviously a lot of conversation about digital public infrastructure in the agri space now. So I think every ministry is starting to think like, building digital public goods and digital public infrastructure using data and partnering. We also are now talking about a social stock exchange, which is going to make transparency hopefully go up in the sector. So there are lots of long term initiatives that have just started off, but I think as a sector we need to bring government to the conversation. There's also a role for a lot of people like Sattva, and I think we take this very seriously at in our organization, because data for development is super critical. For us to kind of invest and build more tools, which can also translate this to the last mile, like you said, right? Because if the smallest of the small NGO in a corner of Bihar cannot be empowered with this, then we are not making change happen. This cannot be a Bangalore conversation alone with someone in Delhi in the government, right? So I think it's really up to a lot of us in the sector to be able to bridge the gap, and create those. While the government can bring the highways, we need to create the rest of the roads, so that the last mile, ecosystem connectivity can be provided. And then I think we need to seriously invest in talent. Your question on talent was spot on. If we do not change the way the talent coming into the sector thinks about data and decision making, we'll still keep doing it the old way of figuring out everything bottom up. Right? That marriage between top down and bottom up is only possible if we bring a new set of impact professionals or development professionals who are very driven by thinking through data and digital and technology. Right? So those are some of the things. Hopefully, in the long run, we can achieve. Sure.
So, Krishna, tell us about Sattva and the work it is doing.
So Sattva, today works in, I would say, 4 different dimensions. Ashraf, and we've been around for about 15 years, and through the hard way, we figured out that impact at scale is interesting, but it's about it's multidimensional in many different ways. So we today do 4 things. One, we're building our philanthropy advisory and implementation business. We're a for-profit company in the impact space, And in philanthropy advisory, we work with nonprofits, CSR, Indian domestic philanthropy, family philanthropy, global foundations, government, multilateral, bilateral agencies in both strategy and implementation. The second thing that we do is we build a lot of digital public goods. So India Data Insights, our data platform, is a big one for us. India Partner Network, which is trying to kind of build the capacity of NGOs who are really small and very spread out in the country, is an important digital tool for us. And we also now have our Sattva Knowledge Institute, which is putting a lot of primary research and data out there, for better decision making. The third thing that we do is, we are now a key player in the ESG sustainability, business sustainability space, both in India and in the global south, helping organizations not only address their regulatory and compliance requirements in ESG, but also actually bring in business solutions to help them solve their sustainability problems. And the last thing is, we're about to also launch an impact fund, as well. So that's kind of the work that we do. We are headquartered in India, work in the global south in about 25 countries, and multiple offices at this point.
So, Krishna, here's a question I ask all my guests at the end of the show. Why do you do this work?
I think, it's a bit of a personal story. And then I guess, I started walking that path, and then multiple people joined, and now we are an organization. I used to do a lot of volunteering, after my, engineering in Pilani, and as I was working in Dell. And one of my good friends in the sector of an NGO that I used to be on the board of, and I was a volunteer of, gave me this coffee table book about all the how street children live in India. And this was in 2005-6 time frame, and it was a fantastic research done on what happens to children on the streets of India, how do they live their lives, and things like that. And it had many data points. It had stories, and it's a fascinating book. And it also had case studies of some of the children on the streets of Delhi, and in those case studies, some of the children were asked to express themselves because they were going, with their photo into the book. So they could write a poem, they could do a drawing, they could just do whatever they wanted, so that it just goes as their expression, And the girl who comes on the cover page of this book, she had written, and that's the name of the book as well. If I were rain, I would go where water cannot be found, right? And that hit me hard, in the sense that here's someone who's on the streets, who has very little, but when she has something, she wants to put it to the best possible use in the most highest need, And here I was coming from BITS Pilani in CIAD, with reasonably decent education, with all the opportunities out there. And that's when I said, hopefully I want to be where, I can contribute the most, when I could create some impact rather than just create only value for myself. So that kind of put me off in this journey of thinking about societal value and, being a social entrepreneur. And, here I am after 15 years.
Krishna, thanks so much for being on the show.
My pleasure. And thanks so much, Ashraf. And I really hope more young people, join the impact space and bring more data into this ecosystem.
All Indians matter.